So up next, we have a panel, but while they set up, so I'm curious, this next panel is about how to create a smart contract on Neo. So just by a show of hands, has anyone in this room built out a smart contract before? Awesome. And then how many of you would consider yourself like intermediate developers, you know, around 5 years of development experience, 3 to 5? And how about beginner developers? And don't be shy. My job is to program ideas into people's heads. So even those less code savvy can get something out of this panel. So be sure to be engaged with it. So the way these panels work is we have a moderator, and I'll introduce everybody shortly. And the moderator will ask certain questions, and then at the end of the panel, we'll have a Q&A sort of thing going on, where these are actually microphones that we can throw into the audience. They're soft, so low damage. You'll still keep all your HP.
No excuse for going overtime here.
Yeah, very fancy setup.
Okay.
Yeah, it will be hard to not go overtime.
Yeah.
Good to go? Okay, cool. So let's begin the introductions. We have, let's see, it's a little out of order, so. Over here we have Ninad. He's a serial entrepreneur. He's a passionate programmer with 30+ years of experience. He was a CTO for several startups in the late 90s and early 2000s. He founded the Red programming language in 2011, which is a full-stack language and tool for smart contract and app development. Next to him, we have Thomas Sanders, who will be focusing on Python. He's a co-founder and developer at Next, which you just saw a little bit about Next, founding member of City of Zion, a developer of NeoPython and the Python compiler for Neo smart contracts, and he's very familiar with the Neo core project and the Neo virtual machine. Next to him, we have Ethan Fast, who will be focusing on JavaScript. He's an entrepreneur and research scientist with a background in HCI, which stands for Human-Computer Interaction, and AI. He's a co-founding member of City of Zion, and previously founded a Y Combinator-funded startup, Proxino, before returning to Stanford to complete his PhD.
I'm also at Next, by the way.
Also at Next,
Yeah.
correct. Next to him, we have Sergio Flores, who will be focusing on C#. He's a software engineer from Portugal and a creator of the Phantasma protocol. He's currently developing tools for the Neo blockchain. And the panel will be moderated by Jesus Nahara, sitting at the end. Jesus formerly worked for JP Morgan before shifting into product development full-time. He's the CEO and founder of SetOcean, a Fort Lauderdale-based blockchain development agency where he has overseen and developed several blockchain-based products. He has also led several teams to win hackathons, such as winning the Bitcoin hackathon in Miami 3 years in a row, and he's a contributing writer for publications like Coin Central. So I'll let you take it from here, Jesus.
Hello? Okay. All right, well, so I think the best way to really kick off this, this panel is to sort of explain how everyone first got into blockchain development. Neo is really interesting in the fact that, you know, it comes with a lot of languages ready. And so I'm curious to hear how everyone's taken their different paths to get to the blockchain world. So what was the first blockchain project you worked on, and how has that shaped how you got to Neo later down the line? You have.
Yeah. Can you listen? Okay. So I first started, my background is game development. I was a game developer for many years, and in games, especially in mobile games, you have something similar to tokens. Almost all games, you can buy tokens and sell. But in this area, there is a big problem because unlike a blockchain, you can very easily create new tokens out of thin air. And players usually like it to cheat a bit. And then I started to research possible solutions for this problem. And I learned about the blockchain, which actually simplified the problem and cannot create anything out of thin air. You have a set of a fixed supply and can move from one address to another and nothing more. So I started learning and I found about Neo. And in the beginning, I found it difficult because everything was in Chinese and there was no more documentation. But after some time, I started learning, studying the code, and I got a big fan of it. And that's it.
Wow. Okay. Ethan?
Cool. So I have a relatively short answer. I played around with Ethereum a little bit, but I really got into it, when Tom, I, and others co-founded City of Zion. So that was really the first major blockchain project I started working on, and that was now it's pushing 7 months ago, I guess, that we started that. So there you go.
Okay, Thomas?
Yeah, my answer is similar. I've been working with Python for a long time, and I think last year, or maybe a year or two ago, I tried out Solidity, and it was one of those hello world ones where you do the hello world and then you just back away. And then City of Zion happened, and we started writing stuff with Python. So that's it.
Nenand?
Well, in my case, we are building a general purpose programming language since more than 7 years. And about a year ago, we started looking into the Ethereum blockchain and the smart contracts, mostly because our language has a broad scope of usages, and we address different domains using many DSLs that we are building, that are built in inside the language. And so we are looking for the next big thing, and the smart contracts were really promising. So we started thinking about addressing the needs for smart contracts, as Solidity and other solutions were not very satisfying. And so we started looking into that from that perspective. And the second reason why we got into that blockchain is that the token concept was something very powerful that we thought could be used in our open source community to help it grow and incentivize contributions and make some rewards to developers.
Okay, I actually really want to touch on the last answer that you gave, and this is a good jumping point. For everyone in the audience, DSLs, domain-specific language, you heard a little bit about Solidity, and that's Ethereum's DSL. Neo actually came out with 3 general-purpose languages out of the box, and Nenand here is contributing Red, which is a domain-specific language. And so let's get a little bit into that. Let's talk about domain-specific languages versus general-purpose languages. And so just going down the line, what do you personally think are the trade-offs, pros, cons of using something like Solidity to go right into blockchain engineering versus going from general-purpose language like C#?
Well, I've been using C#, and also I've been in a new Discord where many new developers come and ask me questions sometimes. And one problem I found is many developers new to smart contracts, they not exactly understand this difference. Because while Neo, for example, can be used in C# or Python, you can't use the full language on it. Because you are doing a smart contract, you are not doing a general program. So for domain-specific language, actually limit yourself to a set of specific things, and that helps a lot. But as long as we keep developers informed about the difference, it will be very helpful.
Okay.
I think I'd take a slightly stronger stance on that, which is that a lot of my research at Stanford is actually developing domain-specific languages for different kinds of tasks,
awesome.
And they really, really help. Like when you're dealing with a space that's very complex, like that you just don't sort of walk into without having a deep understanding of, they can simplify through the right set of abstractions like quite a lot. So I think finding the right kind of domain-specific language for blockchain technology, and this can be API level, this can be different abstractions you use in different programming languages, whatever. But some simplifying constructs that you can use to better interact with the technology without understanding at a low level all of the fancy cryptography that's going on. I think that's really critical for getting people onboarding. So and the other thing is when you have this power, right, you can actually automatically enforce a lot of great security guarantees, right? We all hear every day about all these smart contracts that just totally fail, because they had a bug in them or whatever. And if you apply some of this formal verification or whatever, you're not going to be wanting to do that by writing a proof, right? You're going to want to have some language help you do that, right? So these kind of DSLs just totally critical for that.
Okay, Thomas.
Yeah, I think coming to the blockchain space from another space is generally hard enough for developers. So I've found that, I have nothing against DSLs at all, but for developer to be able to interact with the blockchain in a language that they're familiar with gives them one leg up. So that then they're not struggling with the implementation language as much. Then they get to struggle with the difficulties of working with blockchain.
Concepts more.
Yeah. That's it.
Okay, so my perspective on that is that it's really great for Neo to support many different general purpose programming language for building decentralized apps. So that part I think is really great. For the smart contract part coding, I think a DSL is currently probably one of the best solutions we can have, because the biggest issue with smart contract is the security problem and all the assets that are related to the code you write. And sometimes it's big numbers, like hundreds of millions worth of assets. So we want to have a solution that is as secure as possible, as safe as possible. A general purpose language gives you a lot of power, expressive power, and that comes also with many more risk to make a mistake or a bug. So I'm rather for restricting the space for just the smart contract part, restricting it and specializing it in order to reduce these security issues and to make it simpler by using a domain-specific language. You have primitives, you have semantics in the language that will be way more efficient to code a smart contract rather than a general purpose language that was not designed for that purpose.
Yeah, I really much like the diverse answers here. So I kind of want to follow up with a single answer and see where everyone lands. There's someone out there who's now trying to become, they see this conference and they're trying to become an engineer, a blockchain-specific engineer. They haven't coded before. Do they pick up a general language or DSL?
Well, in part, I think it depends a bit on the person's background. If a person actually is has worked, for example, with Python or C# for many years, it's favorable for them to take that language and continue.
Right. Assuming someone hasn't programmed before.
If they not have programmed before, it's more easy to start with a domain-specific language, because they have way less things to understand. But of course, before they go to programming, they need to learn about the blockchain, and there's lots of things, concepts that before programming, without them, it's not possible. You can just start learning a smart contract, and I speak with developers that both persons who not started programming before, or persons who was experienced programming but they not know how to create a smart contract. And there's lots of issues like what is a block, for example, transactions, that kind of stuff. It's very important to know before starting doing a smart contract.
Yeah, I would say I'd agree.
Yeah, I really think they need to learn how to program. Like,
first.
You can't, even a simple DSL, pretty hard to use. There are some ideas actually out there about how you can do that, but blockchain is so complicated that.
And so new too.
I think programming, yeah.
You think general purpose programming too?
Yeah, I could go either way. I think the most important thing would be to find a community that's like supportive of whatever choice you make, and learn from them, because it'll be very hard to learn it all on your own.
Well, I think a newcomer in that domain should first focus on understanding deeply the blockchain concept. Doesn't need to understand all the infrastructure, architecture, and technology used. Just the main concept, and be sure to get why they are built like that and how they interact with each other. Then it depends what's the goal of the new developer. If it's for building apps or decentralized apps, I would say go with a general purpose language. Something like Python or Red is a very good way to start, because they lower the entrance barrier. Then for smart contracts, I would say a DSL is probably a good way to reduce the risk, especially for a newcomer. And also in our case, we try to build the Red C3 DSL, that's the code name, cross-chain code, for smart contract development. We try to make it as simple as possible so that even a non-programmer could be able to read it. And that's an aspect that we think is very important, because readability of smart contracts should be applied to broader people than just programmers. So not just programmers should be able to read this smart contract, but also lawyers and other business people in order to review and validate that the implementation matches the specification. So that's also a direction where we want to go.
Right. I'm happy to hear that everyone here at least thinks that conceptually, whoever the new program is should learn that and then go into a language first. That's interesting to see. I think usually when we have these panels of different languages, it's very easy to sort of talk about what's the best about your language, whether it's a community, whether it's semantics, whether it's lower barrier to entries. But I'd kind of like to flip on its head here, and let's, if you can, talk about one thing that you think your particular language is missing in its implementations of smart contracts, whether that's infrastructure, whether that's community, and what is the weak point of using the language that you're using?
Well, since my language is C#, and I found the weakness of it is, well, the new actually code is written in C#, and we can say, well, we can use Visual Studio to code smart contracts. Many persons don't use Windows. And I found persons that wanted to create smart contracts in C#, but they were in Linux or Mac. And, well, they can't actually install Visual Studio there. And that's the biggest weakness of C# right now.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so for JavaScript, answer is pretty simple. I mean, I don't think you can actually sit down and write JavaScript and actually have that turn into Neo bytecode right now. So you actually cannot use JavaScript in that way. That being said, JavaScript is basically how you interact with any distributed application right now, right? So if you're using a website and you see it interacting with a smart contract, how is it doing that? JavaScript, right? And so that's like an important piece which shouldn't be neglected, right? So if you're designing ways of interacting with these things, that's also very important, and that's what you use JavaScript for. That being said, there are people at City of Zion right now working on JavaScript, basically translating JavaScript into Neo bytecode. So soon enough, hopefully, you'll be able to do something like that if you just want to use JavaScript for everything. But clearly, that's the weakness right now. If you actually want to write a smart contract, my personal preference is Python. So.
In terms of improvements and things that are missing, there's a lot. Sergio made a pull request for this recently about for adding a debugger map, and I'd like to add a debugger inside of NeoPython for smart contracts, which would make it a lot easier for writing and testing and stuff. And then a really easy to use unit testing framework for smart contracts in the context of the blockchain itself, I think is very important for both security and reliability and all that stuff.
Okay, so a lot of the implementation sort of infrastructure, the IDEs and
yeah, and then Python 3.6 for support.
Yeah.
That's it.
So in the case of Red, what will be missing right now? Well, it's simple. The work on building this DSL is undergoing, so it's not ready yet, not released. So you will need to wait a few months more to play with it. That will be the main thing, I think. In our community, we have a whole community, pretty big now, right now, and there are a few crypto experts that are there, but the vast majority is still discovering the blockchain, and they don't have the background or the experience on that. So I would say we will need more people experience into this domain, especially smart contract development, to give us some feedback and to provide us some input that could be valuable to integrate with our own ideas. For the rest, we will have a debugger and a simulator for each kind of node we will address, so Ethereum and Neo and some other we want to address later this year. And a strong unit testing framework, because that's currently the only way until the formal proofs catch up and provide us some efficient solution. That's the only way to secure your smart contract. So we will have a generative test framework for that. So if some people here have some interesting ideas for that, please join the community and come talk with us.
But I definitely agree with all of you guys looking into smart contract development myself. It was definitely the infrastructure and the testing particularly. It's interesting as you bring that up because the testing, right? You never think about it until you're like, oh, well, I have to put this up on a test network. And then that's an entire other fiasco. So definitely the infrastructure is, it seems like, a big part of the gaps. And curious, now that all of you guys are previous, software engineers from other domain, coming into the blockchain and smart contract world, what did you find was the surprisingly largest learning curve or biggest steep for you guys to sort of climb over getting into the space?
Well, for me, when I first trying to learn what a smart contract works, it was everything confusing. I've been using, for example, for many years, Bitcoin and that kind of stuff, but smart contracts was new for me. And I had to spend quite a few weeks studying everything because it's quite different from normal programming.
From where?
From normal programming, from creating, for example, I created games before, and it's nothing can compare at all one thing with another.
And so the lack of resources made it hard for you to learn.
Yeah, and actually, I had to create, for example, I created a Neo debugger because when I started, I was getting lots of exceptions when running a smart contract and I didn't understand why is this happening. And so I opened the Neo source code and started studying it and created a Neo debugger. And later on, I also created a test framework that, because lack of infrastructure is actually a serious problem in the beginning. But now me and lots of other persons like them have created lots of tools that help.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it just sort of, obviously the biggest thing is getting the mental model correct, right? So, what kinds of data are stored? How are they stored? How do these things interact, with each other? That's really the biggest challenge. Once you have that, the sort of more low-level mundane thing, and kind of Eric gestured towards this in his earlier talk, is just you don't have a lot of the typical APIs or data structures that you're familiar with when you're programming. So, you think, if you're a Python programmer, I use dictionaries all the time, or I use, lists and all these things. Well, you don't have them, right? Like, because that's just not how, the VM is set up right now. So overcoming those barriers, I think, is another big thing. You sort of have to start thinking in this sort of more low-level programming style of way. And I'm optimistic we can get to a point where, again, the APIs get better and you're able to think in the more conventional way. But at least for now, you sort of have to make that shift in terms of your thinking.
Yeah, very much agree. I think the lack of the usual tools that you have in blockchain development throws a curveball that most people really underestimate. From not having access to true random functions to making your usual API calls for everything. Very different. Thomas?
I think coming from, let's see, the difference between how I thought about how system assets could be transferred around.
Okay.
It doesn't work the same as it does in Ethereum. And for a long time, we thought that was a terrible thing.
Yeah.
And from a usability point, for smart contract developers, it's still very hard. But coming around to kind of appreciating it for, kind of appreciating a lot of the limitations that the blockchain gives you, or not gives you, forces on you. And just thinking about problems in a lot different way than normal, development and problem solving. So.
I think it's particularly interesting coming from Python and JavaScript too, because you spent so much time thinking about how grateful you were about these languages that made you sort of miss over these concepts a lot of the time, and now to actually be working on blockchain smart contracts, you have to sort of relearn or learn for the first time for a lot of people that just went into JavaScript or Python. What did you find the hardest learning curve going into smart contract? Well,
probably setting up the tool chains and especially the testing tool chains. That's quite a nightmare. Yeah, that part is probably the hardest so far I've found. At the beginning also maybe understanding some deep concept from the blockchain infrastructure itself. Because when you start reading these white papers or yellow paper or different infrastructure documentation, they throw you a lot of different concepts at protocol level, at the consensus level, and many new concepts we are not really familiar with in the more traditional development world. So you have a lot to learn at once, and that takes a bit of time to digest. But yes, after that, the main issue is really the tool chains.
Okay, getting close to wrapping it up here. So one question I want to ask you guys, I hope you can impose your knowledge on the audience, is number one resource for learning both concepts and programming tutorials for smart contracts. What would you guys recommend?
Well, the official site is from where I learned it, and certainly at now I think is the most complete, where we can find lots of examples, and it was also translated to various languages. So even if, while most people speak English, it's also useful.
So for basic interactions with blockchain, I recommend Neon.js. It has really good documentation. In terms of smart contracts specifically, I'm just going to sort of punt because for me personally, it was actually looking at NeoPython and all the NeoPython documentation. So.
Yeah, I would say reading the source code and try to make a PR and find something broken, and then you'll learn something.
Yeah, I would say pretty much the same. The source code is the best source of information when you have some missing documentation or not up-to-date documentation, and probably check out also some good videos on YouTube about that. There are some really great guys doing some really good work on explaining and simplifying all these concepts for you.
All right, there you have it. Source code, documentation, and YouTube videos. So I kind of now want to wrap it up and open it to the audience. We have around 7 minutes left. So if there's anyone out there who has any questions for our members up here, all the way in the back, yes. All right, give us 1 second. Alex is going to throw you the microphone.
I'm glad I caught that.
How does it?
I just talk. Oh, okay.
Oh, there we go.
So I've been running contract teams for Boston Consulting for a few years. Real-world contracts are really messy and take a lot of work to try and get right. Do the tools have the flexibility to deal with things as they develop, or once something's set in motion, it's set and forget?
Sure, who wants to take this one on?
So you can replace the smart contract. Once you deploy something, you are able to actually replace and fix it. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean it's an easy process. That doesn't mean it wouldn't break a lot of stuff. I think that's an area that we definitely need to improve on. But there is at least some basic flexibility there. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, I would add that adding things that are subject to change into the storage mechanism of a smart contract would be a good way to allow that to be changed without too much fuss. But then you lose some of the deterministic nature of your smart contract. So it's kind of a trade-off.
So question here. From security perspective, there's some best practice, like when you design the smart contract, maybe you first need to think life cycle of smart contract. Not every smart contract can run forever. Maybe some have to stop at a certain block height. This is one kind of security, right? And another example like this happened with the multi-sig parity, right? It's has the init wallet problem as a private function become public. So the hacker was able to leverage this problem and extract like $30 million. And the white hat was able to stop it and to extract it. But the idea of that is to make it secure is you have, as owner of the smart contract, you can emergency like stop, right? Once you see there's a problem happen, you can stop. So those are some of the best practice. When you guys design those smart contracts, you think about this? Or?
Short answer, yes. Tom, do you have anything to add in the next stuff?
Yeah, I think for sure. I mean, you'd have to think about worst case scenarios, and
yeah, I don't know. I mean, just sort of at a basic level, when Next is obviously designing infrastructure for smart contracts, and we're actually trying to design the infrastructure that we recommend that other, sort of token sale people use. So, in designing that, we've obviously been thinking about a lot of these things. That doesn't mean any solution is going to be perfect, but it will at least be better than prior solutions, and we're definitely thinking about it.
Yeah, maybe I can add something on that. I think a good practice is just to try to reduce the complexity as much as possible. Usually when you code for web application or whatever you want to, whatever application on desktop, you don't care much about that cost. But for smart contract, every extra line of code, every extra expression is another possible risk for error and for mistake. So you want to reduce your code as much as possible and reduce the concept and simplify. Not use complex structure, not complex construct. If you can, instead use some simpler one. So always use the simpler solution, the simple path.
I think the answer in consensus is just standardization over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
More and more packages of standards for security will come out and it'll be adopted.
Hi. Can you elaborate on your reason for preferring Neo over Ethereum? Like, both from development side, and secondly, a lot of documentation on the Neo side talks about identity. If you can touch base on how the identity is being stored and how you can always go back and refer to this is the source of this transaction. So how does it ensures that?
So I would say in terms of identity, I mean, in terms of what we're working on, this is basically just traditional UTXO style transaction stuff, and identity here just means address. Right? Like anything that's establishing more than that is going to be some kind of pseudo-centralized or very fancy decentralized entity that's actually storing that identity information. And these are projects that you can look in the space and see people working on those. But these are not, for the most part, available right now. In terms of my own personal interest in Neo, I mean, I think if you look at the advantages of the platform right now, it's largely the scalability aspect. It also does have a sort of nice aspect with the multiple programming languages. And sort of I come from a place of bias here, having done a lot of work with City of Zion, so take that with a grain of salt. But there are I would say the scalability thing is probably the main reason you might want to look at Neo right now over Ethereum, especially sort of as things move forward, because Neo's working on a lot of really interesting ideas there, and it will probably only get better.
Yeah, it's a general purpose languages, and these guys up here, the community that's currently pushing this right now.
Yeah, what does the vision for integration tests with Neo look like? So you can ensure that your smart contracts, when you build them out and build them really complex, aren't gonna changes you make aren't gonna break anything that you've made previously. And are there any language-specific limitations of making integration tests for the Neo blockchain?
Well, that part depends on the developers. We and other person creating, for example, frameworks for integrating unit testing and that kind of thing. I've been working in adding support for that for C#. Right now in GitHub there is a project called NeoLex that it does allow to, I call it a Neo emulator because it can allow you to run a smart contract completely out of the blockchain. So you can create all tests you want and run it, and it won't, it will just run on your computer, and that helps a lot in that with, that problem that you asked.
Like basketball. I think we have time for one last question, and we're going to wrap it up, if there is.
Among these languages, which language has better support, like more active community? And a second is there a language which is a natural fit for blockchain programming better than other languages?
I would say that both the C# and Python have pretty active communities. And there's no general language that lends itself more to blockchain than others. I would guess domain-specific ones would. In the end, the actual language we're all working for is the NeoVM language.
Right.
So I mean that's the
yeah. So if you have a wrapper language that has sort of more kind of verification built into it, like a stronger type system, more rigorous sort of type checking in that sense, that can be useful. It's not sort of sufficient by itself. I think something we're interested in is actually developing some of those languages that also compile down to the NeoVM. So that's sort of something to look forward to maybe.
Yeah, that's exactly what we try to address in our case.
Okay, I think we've actually gone over, so we're gonna call it here. Appreciate all of your guys' time. Appreciate the questions.
Thank you.
Awesome, yeah. Thank you, Jesus, Nanad, Sergio, Thomas, and Ethan. I also want to stress the workshop tonight at GitHub. It's going to be a really cool environment, so if you're curious about smart contracts or anything about the Neo ecosystem, I highly recommend checking it out. Some of these guys will be there. You'll get to interact with them.